everybody, and welcome back to the Upside Swings NBA Draft Podcast, the podcast, the highest ceiling. I'm your host, Bryce Hendricks, joined as always by the great Cooper Klein and the wonderful Stone Hansen. And I'm just now realizing that we should probably loop an intro, like Coop, so you could just always have an intro you could put in front of the other videos because of how we're doing things now. But anyways, now I'm thinking too much. But we're here to talk about some guards, and this is a really exciting group of guys we got. We're going to start with one of maybe the most far off I've been from consensus on a guy in a long time. This is my Walker Kessler of this draft. Even more extreme because Walker Kessler wasn't a projected top 10 pick, but we'll save that discussion a little bbit before we get too into it. Coopstone, my friends, how you guys doing?
I am just now waking up because I wasn't planning to fall asleep right before the pod, but I did. But I'm as we continue to talk about these guys, I will gather my wits about me and hopefully have more cognitive thoughts on them as we continue to yap about them.
I'm doing pretty well. I've been a very busy week. I went to Philadelphia to go tour apartments this weekend, and that was fun, but didn't sleep very well, and it's just been a lot of chaos going on this week. But I'm very excited to talk about these guys, at least to talk about them with you. I don't know about actually talking about them and ranking them and all that stuff, but to have a fun conversation with my friends. That's what I'm excited for. So let's get right into it.
Yeah, these are awful Twitter players. This is not a good group of guys to tweet about. I can feel it in my soul. I think that happens with guards a lot. I think people get very protective over the guards they like and dislike for whatever reason. I think partially because guard play is so specific in the NBA in a lot of ways, where it's often, the effectiveness of a guard is so often dependent on the scheme they're in. But also, just guys like different things from their point guards. You even hear that, in coaching all the time. Oh, man, that's a great guard. He'd be a bad fit for what we do. You don't hear that about 3-and-D wings or, shot blocking big men. It's a very guard-specific thing. I hear it all the time. And Jeremiah Fears is the first guy we're going to talk about. And this is one of the most fascinating prospect runs I've really seen in recent memory. The consensus on this guy coming in was that he just really wasn't that interesting as a one-and-done guy. There wasn't a ton there. I'll talk about his AAU and high school stats in a little bit, but he played at AZ Compass and, played for I'm blanking on the name of his AAU team, but they weren't a particularly good EYBL team. They were kind of a middling EYBL team, and he wasn't even necessarily seen as this big star prospect. But he goes to Oklahoma, and much in the way of a Trae Young, or even there's some other guys I'm blanking on, but point guards that are maybe a little bit lower in the rankings, but go to a school where they get the ball a lot, and they kind of blow up. And Fears had a really big freshman season. So Jeremiah Fears listed at 6'4", 170 pounds. He's an October 14, 2006 birthday. He's 18 years old. He'll turn 19 before the start of his rookie season. His rookie season will be his age 19 season, so he's pretty young. He's not quite like Cooper Flagg young, but he's a young freshman. This season at Oklahoma, he averaged 17.1 points, 4.1 rebounds, 4.1 assists, 1.6 steals, and 0.1 blocks on 43.4, 28.4, 85.1 shooting splits. For a couple more kind of advanced stats, he had a 56.2 true shooting, which is not very good. 48 effective field goal, also not very good, but a 31.9 usage, really high usage rate. Had the ball a lot. 3.1 offensive rebound rate, 13% defensive rebound rate. Not outstanding numbers or anything, but, not horrible for a guard. 28.6 assist rate, 20.2 turnover rate, 0.5 block rate, 3.1 steal rate, 51.8 free throw rate. Really solid number there, right? Gets to the line a good amount. He dunked 9 times for a guard. That's pretty good. Did only shoot 53% on close twos, though. 45.9% on 98 long two attempts, 85.1 on 215 free throw attempts, and then only 28.4% on 134 three-point attempts which is 7.5 per 100 possessions. So I want to start with some queries here. A good one and a bad one. I'm going to give them both to you guys and let you guys kind of go from there. The good one is, a 25% assist rate or above, who have taken more than 5 3-point attempts per 100 possessions, had a 50% free throw rate, and made 5 dunks, who are freshmen or sophomores. This group is interesting in that, a lot of the smaller school guys don't really stand out. Jordan Derkak, Rytis Petritis, Rayshawn Harrison aren't really guys. But if I were to filter it by high major, it's standing out a little bit more. Scottie Pippen Jr., Xavier Johnson, Colin Sexton, Edmund Sumner, Wade Baldwin IV, Andrew Harrison, Marcus Smart twice. Deontay Burton is from Nevada, so I guess that's technically a small school. Peyton Siva and Reggie Moore, a former Coug, is the name that kind of rounds out the list. But the reason I didn't cut out mid-major guys is because John Morant does make this query. So worthwhile worthwhile there. Coop immediately knows that makes sense. That's cool, but that's okay. That's why I did it. And then the bad one. This is drafted players who are shorter than 6'6". I wanted to give him a little bit of room. Who have shot less than 30% from three, who have shot less than 60% at the rim. Really simple. You can't finish, you don't make your threes. The list of guys who did this the year they were drafted is really small. Keon Johnson did it the year he was drafted. And that is basically it. I think Tony Roten might have done this. Might have been the year he was drafted. Everyone else, they did this, and then they had to go back to school to earn a spot. Now, this list is kind of up and down. Other than that, Devin Carter, guy we all believe in and love, he did this. KJ Simpson did this. EJ Liddell, Wendell Moore Jr., two wing size guys that did this. But I think the real kind of comparison points here, KJ Simpson maybe. But it's really guys like Trey Mann, Jason Preston, even Marcus Smart, Chris Dunn, Buddy Hield, another Oklahoma guy, Tyrone Wallace, Tony Roten, Xavier Thames down at the bottom. These are all guys who, had to go back to school and then still have fairly questionable in some ways, NBA appeal. So what do you guys think of the overall stat profile here with Fears, those two queries? What are some things that stand out to you about just kind of the overall stat look here?
I think both sort of highlight the really good and really bad attributes of Fears with those stat profiles. And I think it also, because of that, displays the wide range of outcomes that we'll talk about with Fears that I think exist for him personally. I think those wide range of outcomes involve star bets that have some outlier development, and then you have a lot of guys that did not make the league. You talk about the rim finishing and the 3-point shooting, and if you're a primary ball handler and struggle with those two things, I think both these queries show how hard it is to succeed with neither of those attributes existing, and the outlier level of development that is needed in order to be a force in the NBA without either of those things. And we'll get to that eventually, but I like both of these queries for those reasons.
I think in the second query, especially, a lot of those guys who come back and succeed come back and find other ways to succeed. Like they were maybe slightly overtasked as college basketball players, as primary creators. And they come back and they find defense, or they find elite off-ball play, or they find something else in those college years that really causes them to, start their NBA career or jumpstart it and become a draftable player. And that's kind of my big worry with Fears. I mean, we'll really get into it. But he's just such a specific bet at at like the hardest thing to be in the NBA. And maybe he gets there. I mean, the good comparison is really interesting. You know, anytime you're on a list with Ja Morant, I know that's why you included him, because you need those kinds of comps to justify going top 10. But I think it's just very generally, before we get into like what he actually does, it's really hard to be a point guard. It's really hard to be an NBA level point guard. And so the light that I know I am, and probably Bryce are going to judge him through, may seem a little harsh, but it's through the lens of this is the hardest role and the deepest position in the NBA. You have to hit such high outcomes, especially if you're not, 6'5", 6'6", and not an outlier athlete in a bunch of different ways. So if you guys are ready.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great way to frame a lot of this discussion, is just how high the barrier of entry is for point guards, including guys who are often like talked about as the quote unquote 3-and-D point guards or whatever. But especially, that's not just getting it off the bat. That's not how Fears is talked about, nor is that what he should be talked about, partially because he doesn't play any defense, but partially because if you're drafting a guy top 5, it is very unlikely that you are drafting him to play that role. Now, Fears is a little bigger, listed at 6'4". I think he's probably a little smaller than that, like 6'4". I'm just not very confident. He didn't look a ton bigger than 6'2" point guards in the SEC. But I don't think he's not a small guard, though. I wouldn't say, even though the frame is going to take some work. I actually think he has a frame that's fairly conducive to putting on weight, all that type of stuff. The place I want to start here is with his on-ball sell, the advantage creation, because what a lot of people are touting as a big positive here is his ability to create advantages off the dribble. Stone, I want to throw this to you. Tell me a little bit about how he goes about creating advantages, and just kind of walk us through how good you think he is at creating those advantages.
Yeah, I want to start by the distinction of creating and then weaponizing those advantages. There's a fine line, and I think that Fears meets the first one and does not meet the second one at a high level. I would say that the first one, in terms of actually creating the advantage, though, I would say Fears is one of the best in class with the ball in his hands. Personally, I would say that the intersection between the handle that he has in terms of stringing together moves and exploding out of them, and the speed at which he can do so, I think makes him the best ball handler in this class. I would say, and I think that, and again, this is not necessarily saying what he does out of that handle, the decisions he makes out of those handles, but in terms of just pure space creation away from his defender, I would put it at the top of this class. And I think that the burst is really strong. We're not talking like Scoot level or anything, but I think it is, very high level. I think that he can really string together a lot of combination moves with his handle. He can do a lot of reactive handle things with the defender, and that's not to say he does it all the time, because as we'll get to, I think some of his handles actually premeditated in certain scenarios, but I do think that he has the capability to be reactive. I think that the speed is really interesting in terms of how quickly he can turn it on and off. There's steps where he gets a half a step on a guy, and that's all he needs to get around him, and then he will explode on his third or fourth step and really just create a full step or two distance between himself and the primary defender that was on him. The quickness that he can switch those gears, I think, is really unparalleled within this class. I think that the burst and handle intersection is just, it makes him a top tier advantage creator. I'll leave it there because I have more to say with what he does with once he does create that separation, because I think that is probably, I would, if I had to guess, why you guys are much lower on him. But I feel like it's somewhat inarguable that he is a really good advantage creator.
I don't know if I'd say really good is kind of my big problem, because I think his awareness is just so bad that as good as the advantages that he creates can be, he's just immediately selling them downriver. They just immediately evaporate because there's zero capitalization. And I don't think that the handle is as strong as you think it is. I think is another big thing. I really worry that he's not a great screen user. He's not great at actually navigating into open space and understanding where his bigs are, if they're doing anything other than popping. And it doesn't matter how good the space you create is if you do nothing with it. Even we've seen guys very different players, but Nick Smith and Blake Wesley, who I think are very different players, but I think that they create cleaner advantages than a guy like Fears. I think their handle's stronger. I think they're a little shiftier, and they just can't do anything because they can't score the ball. They can't put the ball in the hoop. And so if you can't do that and you can't properly leverage the advantages you create, you have to be able to do something with it. It doesn't matter how good, the first part is.
Yeah, and that's fair, and we'll talk more about again the value of his advantage creation. I think how I like to think of advantage creation is there's really two ways to do it as a quote unquote on ball player. You can do it in isolation or you can do it in pick and roll. Those are your two ways of creating advantage with the ball in your hands. Obviously, with off ball, there's your shooting gravity, your ability to attack or close out, all that stuff. But focusing specifically on, hey, if this is a star bet point guard, what does it look like with the ball in his hands? I think he's an okay isolation player this year. He was in the 89th percentile overall, but only a 37.8% effective field goal rate. I think the biggest thing that stands out to me is he really requires defenders to jump hard on one of his moves, and he needs them to be out pressuring. As good of as many off the dribble shots as he's taken over the course of his career, he really struggles if guys kind of sag and give a gap. He doesn't just want, especially bigger guys, he doesn't just want to bomb over the top of him. But Janai Broom locked him down on an isolation 4 different times in the same game. And I think Janai Broom is a fine NBA prospect and will probably at least get a cup of coffee in the NBA, but that's not a guy that should be locking down your star bet point guard, even with the difference in age. And I think some of that is that, are things that can be improved. Like I said, I think he's going to get stronger. I think he has a frame that is conducive to adding some weight, especially in his upper body. Right now, his upper body is really weak. But he doesn't get great leverage as a driver. He plays more upright than you would think for a guy who has a height advantage. Or not a height advantage, excuse me, for someone who has a height disadvantage, someone who's smaller. He plays pretty upright, and so he's not always taking advantage of the fact that he's smaller. He is also just not always making the correct reads in terms of what the defender is giving. There were multiple times where, he, especially running handoffs or off ball actions, the defenders are way off, and he, instead of stepping into shots, he takes 3 wide dribbles, allows them to close space, and then takes a shot over a more contested defender. He is good when defenders are pressuring way out on the floor, but he's not a consistently good enough shooter right now. And we'll talk about just how good I think he actually is to, consistently get guarded like that. And even still, NBA defenders are going to be quicker. And like Coop said, he's not good at reading help or beating help. He's pretty susceptible to digs. He gets stymied by, fairly mediocre help defense consistently. And he just also has no feel for, playing off 2 feet right now. When he kills his dribble, he's pretty much done. He has no bag for scoring at the rim off 2 feet. He doesn't really have an ability to create passing angles off 2 feet. Now, that's stuff that can be improved, but it's just adding to the list of stuff that isn't there yet. So maybe the sell is okay. It's pick and roll stuff. So I went through and I got his pick and roll stats from the past 3, or I guess you would say really 2.5 years of basketball. In college, he was in the 58th percentile in pick and roll possessions with the 44.5% effective field goal rate, 22% turnover rate, 49% on twos, 25% on threes, 14.3% foul, getting foul rate, free throw rate, I should say. Those are not good numbers for a star guard bet at all. Especially the effective field goal rate and the turnover rate, really rough. The getting fouled that much is pretty good, and that's something that we'll talk about as a feather in his cap. But he's not converting consistently as a pick and roll ball handler at the college level. Okay, maybe it was EYBL. EYBL, it looks way better. 95th percentile points per possessions, still 47.2% effective field goal rate, not great, but only an 8.6% turnover rate. That's what really changed that number. 44.1% on twos, 35% on threes, got fouled 20% of the time. That's great. There's real standout skill there. In high school, this is a smaller sample size, but this is against top high school competition. 32nd percentile points per possession, 34.8 effective field goal rate, 19.6 turnover rate, 36% on twos, 22.2% on threes, 3.6% foul rate. What I'm getting at is that I don't think he is particularly effective right now as a pick and roll scorer. He's a really bad finisher. Just overall, he doesn't really have a ton of finishing bag. He doesn't have great moves. He doesn't vary his strides very well. If he can't put his head down and go all the way downhill for a dunk, he struggles, especially with rotating shot blockers, but also just because he's not always beating his guys. He doesn't use screens very well. He doesn't get tight to them. He doesn't always set them up well. If guys try to sit on the high side, he is good at rejecting screens, and he's quick enough. Like I think the first step out of a standstill is pretty good. But he's not crazy explosive out of moves. I don't watch him and think, man, there's so much bag here. I think a lot of his production in pick and roll this year was just that he did it a lot. And there's something to be said for he was on a tournament team in the SEC and he earned that. I understand that, but I don't think in watching I was ever wowed by his craft or his his patience, his timing. Really nothing other than every once in a while he'd punish unders well enough. But again, he was also still susceptible to teams like under and late contesting, and he wouldn't always look at the rim. Like he's very feel based as an off the dribble shooter. His off the dribble shooting stats, have been kind of interesting throughout his career. This year, he was 36.5% effective field goal rate, 37th percentile on 133 attempts. In high school, it was 49 attempts, 32.7 effective field goal rate in the 38th percentile. EYBL, it really blew up. 76 attempts, 44.1 effective field goal rate, 83rd percentile. But I don't think it's ever actually been a weapon. It's just something he does. EYBL, it looked good, but if you go back and you watch those EYBL games, the truth is EYBL, as good as it is and as much data as can be taken from certain things, it's also super small sample size. And it's weekends. You can get hot for a weekend. I say as someone who played AAU, played good AAU and was on a good team and understood what it looks like. And I'm coaching AAU now, and I say guys get hot weekends. And it's impressive that he did that, but also he was on a team that was their offense. Hey, get it on the rim and we're going to crash the glass, even if you miss it. And so when you're given that level of freedom and confidence, it can sometimes be a little easier. I think it's notable to me that, he hasn't really been an efficient shooter outside of that setting. And when you watch him, other than when he's hot, he doesn't play like an efficient shooter. He's not always hunting those shots, and he sometimes isn't looking at the rim coming out of pick and roll. So all this is to say that, I'm just not confident in anything with him as a true advantage creator. As much as he does, in a technical, literal sense, get to the rim, I'm just not sold. Again, every once in a while he can hit a tough shot where he's off rhythm, but he's not really he doesn't have great touch. He's just kind of willing to do things, and he's like a usage absorber which is great. And Oklahoma needed that. They were a team that needed someone to just take these possessions, and Porter Moser was a good enough coach that he could kind of craft enough around that, even though they were not a particularly talented team. But I don't know. I feel like there's something in his game that I just really don't buy as a true advantage creator and an advantage exploiter. And I think Coop did a great job bringing up. We've seen high level advantage creators before just fail out. I think maybe the most obvious example, that the elephant in the room in my mind, is Sharif Cooper. I see a lot of Sharif Cooper in Jeremiah Fears, but Sharif Cooper was a way better passer. But at a certain point, if you can't consistently score and you're you're not like a truly elite reader of the defense, it's hard to get away on just advantage creation. And that's my issue with Fears, is that I don't even think the advantage creation is particularly great. I think it's a little bit overrated. And then I think he's an actively bad advantage exploiter. So Stone, I just talked for a really, really long time. But I know you're a little higher. So what am I potentially missing here?
Yeah, I think so. There's a lot to get to. I'll start by saying I would agree in a lot of ways that he is not the advantage exploiter that you'd wish. I think I'm higher on the advantage creation than you guys, but it's undeniable that at this point in time, he is not making the plays that you would want consistently out of those created advantages. I think a lot has to do with feel. I think a lot has to do with touch or lack thereof. And I think both of those things are pretty concerning. I would start. I'm just trying to figure out in my head sort of where I want to go first with this. I would say I'll start with sort of, I think, the passing out of pick and roll and just out of the advantages he creates. I think that he is pretty good at keeping a defender on his hip and getting that guy, quote unquote, in jail all the way to the rim. He can't really finish around them out of the pick and roll when he has that guy there. And when he tries to pass out of it, it generally seems like the passes out of those situations he is doing so because the finish around the rim isn't as open as he anticipated. So now he is scrambling for an outlet, and typically he's not the sort of processor ultimately that you would want in a guy in that situation. Where I think we talked about with like Knuppel, for instance, and how he knows what he's going to do with the ball before he gets to the place that he's going to execute that. Like he sees once he gets to that point where he's going to pass before he even gets there. Fears starts his processing once he gets to the point that he has to start looking for someone else, not before he gets there. And I think that's a really big separator in terms of the kind of outlets that you can find, because now you're looking all around. You can only pivot, and you have no concept of where your teammates are on the court, and you have to figure that out in real time. And now you're struggling to wait for them to cut or to find an opening if you're double teamed, which Fears often was in those sort of scenarios. So I think that is something he really struggles with. I feel like out of the pick and roll, a lot of his passes are premeditated. It feels like he's not, and this sort of goes to, I think, one of you had mentioned that the handle and somewhat of the pressure that he has. Sometimes he can create turnovers out of that too. I think some of his handles premeditated, where he's got this bag, but he's also doing so when he's thought beforehand of, okay, I'm going to string together these moves regardless of what the defender does. It's not as reactive as you had hoped. And I think a lot of that goes with the pick and roll passing too. It seems like he's just not reactive in the way that you had hoped. And when it is reactive, it is processing out of need and necessity in real time, not processing in a way that is before he gets to that point. So all of those things, I think, together make for someone that really struggles to exploit those pick and roll advantages that he can create. That said, I don't want to get too much into value yet, but it is really difficult to find players with that level of baseline advantage creation. And not to say that I disagree with the fact that it means nothing if you can't do anything with it. But just to have that level of baseline advantage creation is difficult to find. I would also say, too, that the touch is just not where you want it to be, especially as a finisher and around the rim. He does do some just, I think, really ill-advised pull-up short jump shots that just it's not a floater and it's not like forward momentum. Sometimes he's going leaning backwards with the one hand trying to make these like fading floaters almost. He just has a lot of these ill-advised shots that when they're not as open as he wants and he can't find that outlet, and then he's resorting to a really bad shot, and he doesn't have the touch to make that work. I think he's really you see flashes of the control. When he's under control, the finishing is in combination with the advantage creation. It looks really special. I think that it looks really good when he is able to get downhill and he's doing so in a controlled manner around the rim, and he can really focus and lock in on getting around a defender near the rim, but it just happens way far and few between than you would like. It feels like a lot of times he's just the game's moving too fast for him. And if that's happening at a collegiate level, that's concerning because probably the main thing you hear from any prospect that you watch these interviews and things, and it's like, what's the most difficult thing of the most difficult part of the transition from the college game to the NBA game? Almost all of them always say how fast everything is. And if things are going too fast for him at a collegiate level, that's pretty concerning when he hasn't even done so at a faster paced NBA. But when he is able to slow down, when he's in transition, it looks really, really good. I feel like I've talked a long time, and I'll give it back to you guys. But I also think this is a case where age does matter a bit to me. He is pretty young, and I think that I'll get to it more in the value section, but I do think I buy into him a lot more than I would someone that would be a year or more older than he currently is. So that portion does help, but I don't disagree strongly with a lot of what you guys had said prior.
The one thing about the age for me is that a guy we'll talk about later in the podcast is like literally basically the exact same age and looks far more refined in a lot of other areas of his game. And it's just like, obviously not every prospect's the same. I'm not here to be like, well, this guy's so much better. Why is Fears not that exactly that good? It's just, he's not, especially with how the NBA is today. It's really hard for me to look at age and be like, well, he's got a lot of time to go, right? You have a lot of time to develop because there's not many teams that are bad enough to take a guy like this and think that this juice is going to be worth the squeeze, and B, are actually good enough at developing a guy like this. All the teams that are at the bottom in this end of the lottery are not historically good development teams, and that's why they're stuck in the lottery year over year over year. And I think it's just, to me, I'm gonna get back on my pedestal. You got to be a certain level of good at every level if you're going to be a star at the NBA level, and you have to have some kind of special. And Fears, every single time I watch him, it's just, there's some advantage creation, but like Nick Smith, I had fifth on my board, and that was special advantage creation. He was getting to his spots at will over and over again, and he missed some reads, but there was still stuff in there that I could pluck onto, and I could be like, I think that this can be built upon. With Fears, I just don't see the stuff to be built upon, right? I don't see any kind of foundation, and that feels really mean to say. But part of that is just that I've been bitten by better prospects than Fears, right? And I'm not going to sit here and I'm trying not to fall too hard into the he's still got time, he's still got development to go. And I do agree that if he does get the proper development, that could be an interesting tool and something could be built there as a point guard. But at the moment, it's just like hitting the big man on the pick and pop is like the most interesting thing he does on a game to game level. Everything else he does is like he panics and somebody else like cuts or moves off ball really well, and that ends up making his read look better. Or it's he makes the wrong decision and it still just works out for him. Like he takes a step back three against two defenders when there's a big man rolling and plenty of space and time to get the pass off. Or he's missing basic reads and threading the needle into a way tougher window that doesn't actually create an advantage. And his teammate hits a tough shot, right? Like he's not doing anything on a game-to-game basis that really wows me and really is like, this is something that is going to translate to the NBA level. And it makes it really hard for me to see him as really anything, because he doesn't even really make a ton of like, he's not reading a big man defender like a backup point guard. He's not just like making basic reads off of just one guy. And some of that is Oklahoma. Some of that is that he played on a bad team. Some of that is he played in arguably the toughest conference ever. You know, that SEC is hard. And the stuff he did in the SEC is seriously impressive. But at the same time, you got to give me something. You have to give me something, and there just wasn't that much for me to really pick on and hold on to. And I just don't see where does he go if he's not this star level creator? And I just don't see star level creator in there. So it's a tough sell for me.
Yeah, so I do think that I'm pretty out on Fears overall. I will say with the playmaking, he's basically never manipulating the defense to his will. He's always reacting to something that's happening. And like Stomach, he's not particularly good at reacting. When he is predetermining, he's not really forcing the defense to do what he wants them to do. I think my biggest difference with my view of Fears and a lot of people's view of Fears is that I actually don't think that it's really hard to find advantage creators at this level. I think if you gave a lot of guys a pick and roll rep as much as Fears gets pick and roll reps, they could do it about as efficiently as him. Maybe not at the same age, but also I just, I think maybe his greatest strength is that he's willing to just kind of fail and make mistakes. And that's great. That's admirable. But, there's a difference between like reading a defense as a playmaker and being reactive. He's reactive in the sense that he's being forced to know what the defense wants basically all the time. Even though he can get a good result, he is rarely stressing a defense out to the extent that he isn't doing what they want him to do. Every once in a while, there's times where he is, just beating defenses and breaking them down fully. But I just don't think it happens as much as people think it does. Just because he's getting a paint touch doesn't mean that the defense isn't happy allowing that, because they know there's help there, and then and this and that, and that's. I just think that there is a little bit misconstrued about him. Every once in a while, I think there's a nice cross-court skip in there and pick and roll. I think there's some development points for him, but I do think that his ceiling, to me, is somewhat capped. Unless he really is just a special off the dribble shooter, which I just don't see. I don't think he is. I don't think the touch is good enough. I think that it far too often becomes a crutch rather than a weapon. And even if it gets to a certain level, I think it falls well short of the best off the dribble shooters. Now it says something he was going to take him. He was a really good free throw shooter, which is a feather in his cap. But I think you can only like off the dribble shooting. People use free throw percentage and certain touch indicators as shooting, indicative of shooting potential, and I agree with that. But I think it only means so much when off the dribble shooting is so different from something like a free throw. And I just don't think he's that level of star off the dribble shooter. It's not like a lot of the shots he was taking were all crazy hard. There were quite a few that were like, he got the flaming bag a lot. I won't deny that. I think he's a competent off the dribble shooter, but I just don't see it being a weapon because he's not good enough at just getting it off with an inch of daylight. He has to do it on something he is predetermined. And to me, that's the biggest issue with his game in general is he's just not a quick enough processor. And so, I think really what the actual upside with him is every once in a while there's times where, especially for AZ Compass, like he'd be running like Iverson plays and he has a good first step off a standstill and he could attack a guy on a quick sweep. And so like I kind of like him more someone that he would run off ball plays for. But here's the issue with that. One, he's still not a great finisher. He's still small for that. And he's a ball stopper. If he can't catch and sweep immediately or catch and shoot, and even when he can't catch and shoot sometimes, he has to hold the ball for 2 seconds. Those guys just to me just don't last in the NBA a lot of times. And so for me, and also he's bad defensively and all this yada yada yada. We went pretty long on Fears, and I don't like going long on guys that I'm low on. But to me, I just don't get it with Fears at all, like at all. And I want to hear you guys push back on this, but I wouldn't draft Fears, and I would probably give him a 2-way just because he's so young, and I would just want to get him in the building and see. But this is not a guy I would draft. This is a guy where if I was advising him, I would tell him go back to school. Now, obviously, he's going to be a top 10 draft pick, so he shouldn't go back to school. Like, if you're going to be top 10, go be top 10. But, like, for me, I watch him, and I don't see a guy that is worth spending real draft capital. I know he might end up draftable in this class for me, but in general, this is not a guy I'm running to the podium to take, and I wouldn't give him anything more than a 2-way. I just don't think what he does is valuable enough, and I don't think he's good enough at those things to overcome that as well. It's one thing to be a Trey Johnson where, hey, I'm not sure exactly how much I value what you do, but you're so fucking good at it that I think you're going to stick anyways. I'm just not there with Fears. I don't think pick and roll advantage creation at a moderate level with bad decision making and generally inefficient scoring is worth taking very high. He's just not my kind of guy. I think a lot of his stats are pretty empty. And so I'm just really, really out on Fears. But Coop, Stone, tell me where you think I might be wrong.
I'll go before you, Stone, so that we'll get a little scale of negativity. I do think I'd draft him. I don't think I'd take him first round. But, once you start getting to the 40s, the fake pick area anyways, where there's not much value difference between the guys who get drafted and the guys who go undrafted, the advantage creation is maybe the most valuable skill that you can take a swing on in the second round. Is it like the best bet at any real skill? No. There's guys who are more realistic bets at more realistic things. But at a certain point, some teams just need to take swings on advantage creation. If you are the Nets and you need a guy who can come off a DHO and just dribble really hard and really fast. I mean, Keon Johnson was like a below average NBA player doing that for them because he's just so athletic. I think having a guy like Fears who can come in and play off of a guy like Claxton or, play off of their bigs or whatever DHO operator they're going to run this year could be, maybe that's a swing worth taking. Some teams just need the bet at advantage creation, and they're not going to be able to get them this year because there's not that many bets at advantage creation in this draft, in any draft. really. Especially my big thing is just at the top of the draft, if you're going to take a swing on advantage creation, it better be a good one. Right. And I think that's the big difference for me between a guy like Fears and someone who, for me, a lot of the bet is advantage creation and a guy like Queen. Very different players. I'm not comparing them as 1-to-1, but Queen is second on my board based almost entirely off the fact that I think he's the best advantage creator in the entire class. And because he creates clean advantages, he does it often. It's every time down the floor, and it doesn't matter what he's doing. It is an advantage every single time. And he has the skills to capitalize it. The flashes are there, all this stuff. And Fears just doesn't have a lot of any of that. He just creates the advantage. And he loses his handle coming off of, normal pick and rolls. And he cannot handle a double. He cannot handle a trap. Against sub NBA athletes, when he comes to the NBA, what does that look like? What does him attacking the rim against Rudy Gobert look like? And as much as that is the worst case scenario, it's a question you have to ask. He's going to play Rudy Gobert at least twice a year. He's going to play Wembanyama. What do his advantages look like against elite NBA athletes? And I just don't think they're there. So it's hard, but I think it's worth some kind of a swing at some point.
Yeah. This is one where I understand. It's not like there's a complete, I just don't get where you're coming from. Like I understand why you would be very out on Fears. I think those worlds of him not being anything in the league are very real. Him, not making it into a fifth year in the NBA because of a lot of the concerns we talked about. I think those are very real outcomes that exist for him. For me, he's very much I don't want to say boomer bust because I actually do think there's a little bit of middle ground there. I do think that there's some backup type outcomes for him that exist where he's just a good enough advantage creator to be able to stick you without the decision making allowing for him to be a consistent starter or a major part of your offense, which is what teams that are drafting him high are doing that for. But I understand why you would not have him as a first rounder or anywhere below that. For me, I view the advantage creation as special where you guys don't. I actually do think it is really special trait that he has. And obviously he over dribbles. He has all these rough tendencies. Defensively, we'd even touch super far on, but he's just really poor defensive screen navigation. I actually think the off-ball defense isn't horrendous, but the on-ball stuff is. And I think that there's a lot of concerns there for sure. And for me, the intersection of age and what I view as special, you guys don't, but I view how quickly he shifts gears, the pace manipulation, just the advantage creation in general. I think that's such a rarity that I view it as pretty valuable, despite what he does out of it not being very good. There's last year I had AJ Johnson as a late first, I think, 28, 29, somewhere in there. Because I thought he's just a really special advantage creator. He's so athletic. He's got a pretty good handle. That's just a baseline that not very many guys have. And with Fears, he has that, and he's really young. And I'm just betting on him figuring out a lot of those faults that he currently has. And maybe I'm doing it too high. I have him 8th on my board currently. And my board in that tier, and really the only guys I strongly believe in this draft is Flag, Harper, and Khan. Outside of that, my board is just outside of those three, everyone is more of like a first rounder rather than a lotto type caliber player. I think Fears is a first rounder for me. And in this class, that puts him pretty high on my board because I don't think there's a lot of first round caliber talents in this draft. But I think typically a guy like that in the late teens or in the 20s is someone I'd be willing to take that bet on at that age with that level of advantage creation. Now, if you don't view it as special, then yeah, I wouldn't touch him in the first round either. But even though I do, and I view all the other stuff as not, pretty far away, I view him as young enough, and it really does come down to I'm just betting on him figuring a lot of it out because I think the rest of it is worth trying to make that happen. And there's not a lot of star bets in this class, and I think if you can get those things to formulate for him, those star outcomes do exist for him. Even though they're far out of reach, it takes a long time to get there. It takes a lot of things to go right. I think there's only like 5 or less you can fit them on your hand in this class that have star outcomes, and I think that for me, Fears is one of them. No matter how thin of a chance of it is formulating. So I have him 8th currently, and I typically wouldn't have him that high, but this class is pretty underwhelming.
Oh, there's like 4 guys, in my opinion, so far who are real swings at a true star in any kind of way. And if you think Fears has that kind of outcomes in him, then go for it, especially in a class like this that is kind of underwhelming outside of the top guys. So, yeah, I know that we've done a lot of fighting, a lot of scrapping, but I do think that's a very fair analysis.
My pushback is just I think elite advantage creators have to be able to read guys one-on-one better than he does, and that's my I'll leave it at that. But I just don't think he's particularly good at reading bodies or getting hips. Like, even though there's some good pace manipulation stuff, I like the number of guys who can get high ball screen reps like that, is super low. And we didn't spend any time on it, but he is fucking atrocious on defense. There is no chance he can be anything but a bottom percentile defender, in my opinion. Like, even the steal rate being fine is all just him like flying around here and there to get a steal. Like, it's not making good reads. It's not having particularly good hands. It's not guarding the ball. I just think that I don't know. I'm just not there.
My big thing with the defense, like you said, the steals, that he only tries whenever it's to get a steal, right? There is no effort any other time on the floor, which is really frustrating.
Yeah,
I would say he off the ball sticks with guys at a decent rate, but yeah, for me on the ball, it's pretty horrendous and Trey Johnson like.
But okay, let's move on there. Again, I don't want to spend too much time being low on a guy. I'm sure there will be some people who question my just how low I am, but that's okay. Let's move on.